부회장 제이크 더넘 참석하셨습니다. 그리고 오늘의 그 조명 디자이너에 대한 창의적인 조명 디자인이라는 주제로 강연을 해주실 트레버 스털린 참석하셨습니다. 그리고 c&clightway 정호목 회장님 참석하셨습니다. 연사가 좀 많습니다. 이제 마지막으로 c&clightway 정화수 대표이사 참석하셨습니다. 네, 이상으로 그 내빈들에 대한 소개를 마치도록 하겠습니다. 그리고 이어서 오늘 세미나를 위해서 홍콩에서 그 ETC 아시아 지사장 윈이 축하 연사를 준비했습니다. 윈의 축하 연사를 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. Thank you. Distinguished guests, friends, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to extend to all of you, on behalf of Electronic Theatre Controls, a warm welcome for having all of you to attend 2018 International Lighting Seminar. Thank you, Mr. Chongs and c&clightway, who is our great dealer of Korea. And for over 2 decades, they have been successfully introducing our products and to explain the benefits that our products can bring to the market. And thank you also for helping and all your efforts in organizing this event. Now, something about ETC. So as all of you are aware that ETC has acquired high-end system back in April 2017 last year, ETC Asia, which is our Hong Kong office, we now covers the distribution of ETC brands and high-end brands for regions including East Asia, Southeast Asia, and now Australasia as well. And for high-end products, we are very fortunate that c&clightway was and continues to be the dealer for Korean markets. And this is really great news for everyone because c&clightway is strong in product knowledge, technical, and customer service, etc. With the continuous company growth of ETC and our recent acquisitions, ETC Asia and ETC headquarter in Middleton, we are again currently under office expansion. And the photos here are our headquarters in Middleton. For headquarters in Middleton, they are under expansion for R&D departments so that we can continue to provide development of innovative products for the market. And as for ETC Asia, we are now currently building a small-scale demo area to showcase high-end products and rigging products as well. And we welcome all of you to visit Hong Kong when the project has been completed, and it will be in some time around May this year. And for those of you who will be visiting Pro Light and Sound in Frankfurt, Germany this year, please do come by and have some fun at our booth. Please note that high-end booth will be in Hall 4, D59, and then ETC traditional products will be in Hall 3. So we'll be having a really large booth because like three sessions, E51, E50, E47, and F51. And I was mentioning having some fun at our booth. So what kind of fun? So fun with hands-on experience with our products, fun chatting with our product experts so that they can offer you demos and explain our product features. And lastly, fun having unlimited beverages at our booth while chatting with your new and old friends. And then one more thing is about high-end. They will be launching something new, including Hawk 4 hardware and fixture library, so stay tuned. And before I hand over to the chairman of c&clightway, Mr. Cham Chong, I just want to say to all of you that we deeply appreciate your time and your effort in joining us today. I look around and I am in awe with the collected expertise gathered here with us. So thank you, welcome. Please sit back and enjoy the show.
ETC가 하이엔드를 인수했다는 소식이 지사장을 통해서 오늘 공식적으로 더 얘기가 나온 것 같고요. 그리고 다음으로 저희 c&clightway의 정호복 회장님의 개회사가 있도록 하겠습니다. 회장님 앞으로 나와주시기 바랍니다.
안녕하세요. 정호목입니다. 조명이 이렇게 앞에 있으니까 앞에 아무것도 안 보이네요. 이런 그 행사를 시작할 때 처음 인트로덕션 저거 하는 거는 최소 짧은 시간이 좋다고 생각을 합니다. 저한테 이렇게 인사 말을 하라고 그래서 제가 나왔습니다만 어쨌든 방금 그 윈청 홍콩 ETC 아시아 매니저가 큰 틀에서 ETC에 대해서 설명을 해드린 바가 있습니다. 그래서 특별히 제가 추가로 소개해드릴 거는 없는 것 같고요. 제가 엊그저께 ETC 웹사이트에 들어갔더니 프레드 포스터라는 ETC의 창업자가 1975년도에 18살에 ETC를 시작한 것을 다시 본 적이 있습니다. 어쨌든 그때서부터 스테이지 조명에 관련해서 한 길로만 걸어왔고 지금까지 한 43년 동안 이쪽에 모든 힘을 기울여온 그런 회사가 ETC가 아닌가 그렇게 생각을 합니다. 요즘에 세계적인 그 조명 관련 메이커들을 보게 되면은 굉장히 손바뀜이 좀 심하다고 생각을 합니다. 회사들이 M&A로 이렇게 인수가 다른 회사로 되고 하는 이런 과정을 거치고 있지만 ETC는 유일한 오너십으로 해가지고 43년 동안 이 유일한 길을 지켜온 회사입니다. 그런 면에서 이제 c&c와 어떤 일맥상통한 부분이 있지 않나 그렇게 생각을 합니다. 그리고 오늘 처음에 그 조명 디자인에서 설명을 해줄 트레버 버크라는 사람을 캘리포니아에서 왔다고 그래서 제가 1979년도 1년 동안 미국에 있은 적이 있었는데 그때는 태어나지 않았던 사람이 오늘 이런 조명 디자인 관련해서 오늘 한다고 그러니까 좀 감개가 무량합니다. 그리고 그 다음 연사로서는 제이크 던넘 저희 오랜 친구입니다만은 미남 청년 우리 제이크가 예전에 디밍 컨트롤 개발 쪽에 많은 힘을 써왔는데 요즘에는 이제 R&D까지 전부 맡게 됐는데 오늘 이 세미나에서는 과연 그 많은 LED 중에서 어떤 제품을 어떻게 선택을 할 수 있을 것인가에 대한 어드바이스를 주는 이런 세션이 아닌가 그렇게 생각을 합니다. 오늘 이 세션이 여러분들한테 많은 도움이 되기를 기대하고 다시 한번 오늘 와주신 여러분께 감사드립니다. 감사합니다.
네, 이어서 오늘 세미나를 강연해 주실 분들에 대한 소개가 있도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 조명기술 컨설팅을 맡고 있는 미스터 트레버 버크입니다. 남가주대를 졸업한 후 현재 비주얼 노이즈 크리에이티브의 수석 디자이너로 근무 중입니다. 또한 연극 기획자로서 활동하였으며 대표적인 작품으로는 고도를 기다리며 시애틀의 잠 못 이루는 밤, 이상한 나라의 앨리스 등을 기획하여 성황리에 마쳤습니다. 또한 그 외에 다수의 연극들을 기획을 하셨습니다. 그리고 일본의 도쿄 디즈니랜드 메인 퍼레이드 조명 디자인도 기획을 하였으며 영화 작품으로는 더 인크레더블 버트 윈드스톤이라는 작품과 로스앤젤레스 필하모닉 2012 갈라쇼 등의 조명 작품을 기획하였습니다. 그리고 포스터 더 피플 애니멀 컬렉티브라는 프로덕션 및 디자인 쇼 감독으로도 참여하여 다방면에서 창의적으로 조명 연출을 진행하고 있는 스피커입니다. 그래서 오늘 1부 세미나 주제 또한 The Secret of Design Out of the Box라는 주제입니다. 다음 2부 세미나를 강연해 주실 분은 미스터 제이크 더너입니다. 현재 ETC 본사의 무빙라이트 개발팀 총괄 매니저로 근무하고 있으며 경력으로는 ETC사의 기술 개발 및 제품 마케팅 매니저, 소프트웨어 개발팀 및 시스템 관리 그리고 유니즌 에코 릴레이 패널 및 센서 IQ 개발에 참여한 경력을 보유하고 있습니다. 금일 세미나 주제는 The New Language for High Performance Writing이라는 강연을 주제로 진행할 예정입니다. 지금까지 2018년 대구 세미나에 강연해 주실 분들에 대한 소개가 있었습니다. 많은 정보를 받아가실 수 있는 알찬 강의가 되시길 바라며 세미나를 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 첫 강연을 해주실 미스터 트레버 버크 씨입니다. 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Trevor Burk. I'm from Los Angeles, California. Thank everyone for being with us this morning. Thank you, c&clightway, for bringing me out here to talk a little bit about my attitudes and views towards creativity and where that has taken me thus far in my career. We just scroll up. And kind of how that got me to where I am now and how I feel that there's some lessons from that I think are applicable to all of us in the industry all over. So my name is Trevor Burk, like I said, and I come from California. And I spend a lot of my time coming up with creative solutions based in various corners of the entertainment business. I think of myself first and foremost as a lighting designer. That's what I went to school for, and that's the language and the vocabulary I feel most comfortable with. Although now I find myself attaching more and more various corners of the industry, sometimes more or less or different responsibilities, but to me it all flows back through theater and lighting and storytelling. So that's where I come from. That's kind of how I approach the world. So I started directly out of school working in lighting because that was what I had studied. So pretty much directly after graduation, my early career was spent splitting time between the Los Angeles Opera and large-scale Disney projects with a little bit of time working in classical music with the Philharmonic of Los Angeles. Soon thereafter, both on the Disney side and on the opera side, an opportunity presented itself to start leveraging video as a lighting element, and that fascinated me, and it was some of the early first opportunities on larger projects that I had was to fold video in as scenic texture, as a lighting, a textural element. So that's kind of how I got my first introduction to kind of taking new ideas and synthesizing it into what I was already comfortable with, so adding lighting. So this is an example of lighting projection over scenic for a large-scale Disney event with an orchestra. So this was kind of an early awakening for me that my career was probably not going to be limited to only lighting and only theatrical lighting, and not for any reason other than I found it exciting to discover new ideas and new creative concepts and how we can synthesize them together, which is a lot about what today's conversation is really about. So kind of the next chapter of my evolution was to take those first two basic ideas of the lighting and the video that I understand and apply it to my theater roots and my theater storytelling experiences. And I started to have opportunities to expand into touring music and taking my ideas and working with bands to create environments that reflected their music and their emotion and my vision. We had a lot of fun and opportunity to think big and also use classic theatrical techniques. This is an example. It looks like a lot of lighting, but all those are, this is flickering. Let's see if we can. Those are all actually 7 towers that you can see full of lighting that one side had video on it, one side had a scenic element on it, and one side was full of lighting, and throughout the show they all rotated, which to a lot of people in the rock and roll world was very exciting and new, and to me and to anyone who came from theater, it goes back to the very early days of theatrical scenery. It's just a periactoid, which is a really basic scenic concept that goes back to the first days of theater that we just applied in a modern technique. In the last couple years, my work has taken me and added in the last new component, which is participating as a screens producer in live television shows, where I am part of and responsible for the creative input of how scenic screens, so video environments in large-scale broadcast entertainment looks. So this includes the performances and like how a performer looks, what's behind them on stage, but also the workflow and how we integrate in broadcast standards and broadcast trucks and transmission signals, and what the general look and feel of the set is as a scenic element when it's in more of a neutral state, which is kind of something like you see here from this last year's Billboard Music Awards. So to me, I still, no matter what I'm working on, like I said, I think of myself as a lighting designer. So this is all just kind of an evolution of that tree, and we'll talk more about this later, but I think creatively it's about trying to start to feel and synthesize new experiences and how you can tie them together. One of the biggest things I learned early in my career working with Disney and also in the opera was that creativity can sometimes be stifled by the desire to know the path or know the outcome before the time is right. So that's to say, if a project comes about that there's a huge opportunity, but we don't necessarily know how we're going to get there, there sometimes tends to be a little bit of a negative feeling towards it, or that you're not capable of it. But when I was at Disney and when I was at the opera, I kind of grew from the opportunity of time to figure things out. So we often had time to think through problems and think through solutions. And the best part of that is the creativity that comes out of getting somewhere that's better than your expectations at the beginning. So we're going to talk through a couple examples of projects like that. So this first project is Main Street Electrical Parade at Tokyo Disneyland, a parade called Dreamlights. The parade had been around since the early 2000s. My first participation in it was for a refresh in we started in late 2009, early 2010, and then installed it in late 2011. So it was a long project, but when the project started, the first thing we had to go off of was this is just a hand drawing on black paper. So this was the inspiration and the creative direction of where we wanted to go. Traditionally, electrical parades are three-dimensional objects, but all covered with multi-circuit, pre-selected lighting fixtures. So they're effectively strings of little tiny festoons that are pre-woven together. At this point in time, the parade was making a switch from traditional incandescent peanut lights to single color LED. But this design came around, and the early design concepts were well, how great would it be if Genie was a three-dimensional object, and throughout the course of the story, which is the 2 minutes and 8 seconds of the parade loop as it's going down the parade route, his story could be taken from a part in the movie where he goes through all these costume changes. So he changes from, a baker to a milkmaid to Genie, and so it's a really iconic portion of the movie, but it was going to require us to be able to effectively change his costume. So the first thing we knew is we knew it was going to be in 3D, and at that point in time, no one had successfully done an installation of RGB pixels on a 3D object where it was successfully and seamlessly mapped with video in a way that was more than just abstract patterns, because we wanted to actually have him look like Genie and then be able to change his clothes. So we had a lot of figuring out to do, because we were just lighting designers and there wasn't really know-how of how to do this. So the first thing that we really had to do is we had to go find creative partners and creative teams and ways of thinking that have already started to solve problems that we had, and we needed to add them into the way we're going to think. So we started by uncovering and starting to work with CG artists. So concepts that were relatively foreign to us at the time, specifically 3D mapping, UV coordinates, UV unwrapping. So what we knew we needed to do was we needed to figure out a way to take concepts that were used in video games, like this, take an avatar that is covered in imagery. We needed to understand how we could take that idea, flatten it out, which is make it look like a peeled orange, and create a workflow where we could take that content and then rewrap it onto the fixture or the Genie, as he were, so we could then create content. Slow it down?
Do a couple pauses.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I can't see anyone, so I'm just talking to myself up here, it feels like. So here we are this is about a year and a half before we started to install Genie. And we had an early and kind of proof of concept that we can make him have video on him. Didn't necessarily have to be what we wanted it to look like in real life, but we knew it was going to work. So specifically, what we started to discover was there was a technique in the video game and CG industry used for movies, which is called UV mapping. So what you see here is a 3D object with video applied to it. This object here is the 3D object. So if you ignore all of the content on Genie, that's the 3D object. This is the corresponding UV map to the object. It uses the terms UV because it's actually UVW. It's Cartesian coordinates that are specific to a 3D object. So in the same way as X, Y, and Z would be in a 3D drawing, UV and W apply to a specific for a 3D object inside of a drawing. So these were all things that were totally unknown to us when we started the project. But at this point, we knew we could get it to work, and we knew we could make content that would map onto the structure. So I know we'll start here, and we'll talk about a little bit about, so this is ultimately how it ended up looking and how it ended up working. After we solved the problem of how we were going to get content to map onto the float, we had to figure out how we were going to creatively work to get an outcome that was going to feel appropriate to the result of the project. Most notably because it's really impossible to create video content that's supposed to emulate lighting in a flat screen and understand how it's going to look in 3D space. So the solution here, again, was taking ideas that were borrowed from pre-visualization software, in this case, one that has come up a couple times in my career called Vision, where there was the opportunity to use UV mapping that they built into that software, specifically so if you're using previs for a concert stage, or let's say this hall, and you wanted to put video on the screens, they just had a little component that allowed you to route video out of a video source into a video capture card, and then it would UV map to wherever you wanted it to go. So when I learned about that, I called up Vision and I said, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to do a project. It's about 65,000 pixels, but I don't need any DMX control. I need to run it all with video. I want to use your UV input card, your UV input capabilities. And this is a response I've gotten quite a bit from manufacturers in my career. They say, well, it's not supposed to work like that. And my response was, but it should work though, right? And they said, yeah, that's a really cool idea. So effectively what this was we used a lighting pre-visualization program to pre-visit and then had the opportunity to then save those files down, use a program called Maya to take the large 3D map, or large UV map, repatch the whole thing down to a simplified thing that could go back on a player that then fit onto the float and with great success work down the parade route. Here are a couple photos of Jeannie on the parade route going through costume changes. The biggest takeaway that I always have from this, other than the project, was extremely rewarding and extremely fun to solve problems, was how amazing it was to finish a project. It's not only with lessons, but also knowing that there's whole portions of the industry that existed that I didn't even know were apparent before we started. So that was my big takeaway from that. So if that project we kind of started at the beginning and worked towards completion, this next project I want to talk a little bit about, we're going to go the other way. So I want to show you, this is the end result of a project we did for Disney's Animal Kingdom in Orlando. The centerpiece ride at this theme park in Orlando, as on the Disney campus, is a ride called the Kilimanjaro Safari Ride. And the safari ride is a very large, very long experience. It takes about 20 minutes for a guest to get in a safari van and drive all the way through and see animals. And it's broken up into 3 acts. So there's a wooded, foresty area. And then Act 2 is this large African savanna. And then there's a bunch of lions, and you come through. And the 3rd act is back in a rocky, tight, high mountains all around you as you come back in. When we started the project, the theme park always closed at dusk. So there was no need for lighting, any night lighting at all in the theme park. There was some very minimal emergency type lighting for maintenance, but other than that, there was no themed lighting in the park. There was a desire to extend park hours at least a couple hours, if not longer, into the nighttime. So our charge was, how do we upgrade the park? How do we light this attraction that originally didn't have night lighting, but not make it look like a show? So the first creative conversations that happened between the creative director and the management at the Disney parks were, let's take this idea that the idea was to minimize the amount of fixtures, which would increase our chances. Oh, it's going to crash again. What is this? Oh, try again. We'll just skip over that picture. Let me just go here and see what happens. So the idea was to minimize the amount of fixtures and use really big, really well-focused, really well-thought-out, long throw lights to create an environment that it felt very natural. It was obviously going to be theatrical. It obviously was not going to be real. We weren't going to fool anyone. You know, you're getting in a ride vehicle. You're at Disneyland. You know it's theatrical. You know it's fake. But we wanted to inspire that after the sun had set, each of the 3 acts were a progression into nighttime. So Act 1 was going to be late afternoon sun. Act 2 was meant to be the sun was frozen right on the horizon, and Act 3 was meant to be the moon was fully risen. So if we walk through, I can walk you through the ride path here. We're going to start here, so this is where the guests would load into the ride, and this portion all along the ride path here was all Act 1. So all of these markers here denote where we had light poles ultimately after number of mock-ups. So it was in this section that we had the idea that throughout the whole ride, if we could restrict the lighting angle to always over the guest's left shoulder as they were progressing through on the ride path, it would feel somewhat, like the sun was locked off behind them. And so we were going to ignore the fact that the car was turning and kind of leave them frozen. So here, everything was very steep over their shoulders, so it felt kind of 2 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, bright, sunny ambers. And then as we hit this point here, this is where we went from Act 1 to Act 2, and the sun went from late afternoon to sun right on the horizon. So the inspiration here was the scene from, if anyone's seen it, the Disney film The Lion King, where the sun is frozen on the horizon and there's giraffes walking through. So we wanted to try and create this for ourselves in real life. This path, the first thing of coming into Act 2, first road went all the way down here. It's one of the longest straightaways in the entire ride. So we knew we had a big opportunity for a really magnificent vista. So what we did was this became kind of this area here became the central idea of the entire attraction, which was to take a extremely massive video wall at a brightness that most walls are not made and treat it as a LED soft light and look like the sun, because it was a big half circle. And honestly, there's not a whole lot of really great photos of this because it just looks like the sun on the horizon because it's so bright. So you'll have to go to Disneyland and see it with your own eyes. But if we go here and, just for a little bit of scale, it was about 1.5 kilometers this way by about 0.5 kilometer this way. We had our central point here where this is where this entirety of Act 2, which is now what I'm tracing here, this is all Act 2. The idea was this is all late evening, or this is all the sun low on the horizon before you turned into Act 3 here, which was going to be all moonlight, deep blues. So this might be a little bit difficult to see here, but this was our original lighting plan from post mock-up and after all of our lighting surveys had been done. So what you might kind of be able to make out, and it might be better on the side screens, is in here, all of the lighting focuses in Act 1 and in Act 3 are all relatively straight down. Small pools, because they're all relatively steep and over the shoulder. Whereas in Act 2, the concept was very long, very shallow angles that threw long distances. So this light here to here, I think was about 1,800 feet. It was very far. A lot of times when we're having the opportunity to create new approaches to design problems, there has to be an opportunity to figure it out. And no one, in my experience, allows more and better time to kind of figure the process out than my projects that I've gotten to do with the Walt Disney Company. And this project was was absolutely the exact same experience. To get to the final result, we knew we were going to have to ask lighting fixtures to do things in longer throws and in different ways than they'd ever been done before. So after we kind of came up with the concept, we had to start to prove initial ideas. So I'm a huge believer in the mock-up process. And we had a really large mock-up at Disney where we started to emulate what the steep poles would look like and what the long throw poles would also look like. So this here is a photo of an example of 4 trusses hung on hoists that we could drive into the attraction with the idea that we could park it and start playing with what fixtures looked better, at what angles, at what colors, and it roughly approximated what actually it was gonna be and how it was gonna work. That big central point that we said wanted to emulate the sun on the horizon and kind of be our key point for the long shadow throws. That was a large mock-up where we strung together pretty much a bunch of different ideas that might work. Bounce lights, HMIs, long throw xenon fixtures. We hung, it's a little hard to see, but we hung 4 different types of LED walls to measure pixel pitch and brightness. These are HMIs that we threw into bounces to see if that looked good. Up top, we had long throw xenon lights, all with the idea that we could look at all these different options while inside the park and inside the ride. So this crane hoisted it up and over the forest that separated the back of house from the actual attraction. And we could go inside the ride and drive around until we got a desired result, which is something like this. So that's kind of the groundwork of today's conversation, which is not being off-put by the fact that we don't know how we're going to get there when we start a project. In my experience, every time I've been able to come to the table with an opportunity where we don't know the outcome, as long as a recipe is followed, it's always extremely successful. And to me, the cornerstone of that recipe is a team that is, in your mind and in your experience, the best at what they do, the best with their ability. And that way you can have ultimate trust in all the components. And that team is you as a leader or you as a component of the team. That team includes the manufacturers and the reps that you deal with and the fixtures that you use and your programmers and your artists and your illustrators and your draftspeople. It's my success, either as a team member or as a team leader, is always based on everyone who's participating is really top of their game and top of their class. Another large tenet of what I think creative thinking comes to me successfully is the ability to use the knowledge that you have. There's a lot of times, just because of kind of who we are and how we work in the industry, that we're asked to do projects that are different than anything we've ever done before. And these last 2 projects are an example of a project that are different from anything anyone has ever done before. But a lot of times it's not groundbreaking. A lot of times projects are just new to you. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple projects like that were new to me and how success can come out of using your creative roots. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was approached for the first time to do a museum exhibition. A a designer by the name of Diane von Furstenberg was doing a retrospective of her career, and I was brought on to be the lighting designer to help her tell her story of, the retrospective was called A Journey of a Dress. So telling the story of her life through her design work from the very beginning of her career through present day. I was brought in and we treated it like we treated any other design brief. So I treated her as the director. We talked about process, we talked about what we wanted it to look like, and we talked about how we wanted guests to feel and what we wanted them to take away. And then I used the skills and the knowledge that I had to do the best job I could with it. I look back at this and I'm very proud of the work we did and how it looked and how it felt. But I also look at this and I see at the very early part of my career how I treated it very theatrically. I used the tools that I know and that I felt good with. I lit the entire thing with tungsten source 4s and cyc lights, which is very, very uncommon for a museum installation, mostly because they're bigger and more light than a lot of museum requires. I think the benefit of doing that was it stood out. The benefit of doing that was people enjoyed having a different experience and feeling very immersed in the way the lighting worked and the way the lighting looked. What I took away from it was my opportunity to learn from the people I was working with and learn more about the museum world. So when I got another opportunity to do a museum, I could take my theatrical knowledge that I started with, the museum knowledge that I already had, and synthesize it into something that was better because those two things came together. So a couple years after doing the Journey of a Dress, I was called by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Most people know them as the Oscars. They do the Oscar broadcast every year, but the Academy wanted to launch their museum project. So I was going to do their very first ever exhibition in Los Angeles called Hollywood Costume. Hollywood Costume was based on the art and artistry of costume designers through the history of cinema. And we talked a lot about how we could pay homage to costumes that had a lot of fame and notoriety throughout the history of movies. I took what I learned from the Journey of a Dress exhibit, and this exhibit had a lot more challenges because it was curated by the Victoria and Albert Museum out of London, and with that came a whole lot of curatorial rules that didn't exist when it was Diane von Furstenberg doing an exhibition of her own art and her own artifacts. So first and foremost, the thing I had to go up against was I had to fall into a lot more exhibition-style regulations when it came to brightness, so we didn't degrade the textiles. At that point, I felt like I had a great opportunity. Source 4 mini LEDs had just come out, and it was the perfect fixture. And you can kind of see in this fixture we had. We did Diane von Furstenberg with about 150, 170 lights. We did this because one of the things I learned was I wanted a lot more control. So on this project, this is one of 7 galleries, and in all we had about 900 Source 4 mini LED gallery fixtures, which there's actually a bunch in this room right there. Because they gave us the opportunity to be small and lightweight and not very expensive, and we could control them all with minimal amounts of power and have a lot of very kind of surgical precision on each piece, because I wanted to have at least 3 lights per costume. The exhibition itself, you came in a long hallway, and this is where your eyes got adjusted to the room. You walked through this corridor here, and you were immediately faced with a Academy specification size CinemaScope movie screen where you were standing extremely close to it. So it was kind of this immersive video bath to get you ready for the exhibition. And after that, you progressed through all of these rooms in order here. So where you went through the history of costume, where we told the stories of simple costumes to Victorian costumes to there was an interactive display between directors and costume designers. This room was the photos you just saw, which was all superheroes, all the way through kind of this finale, which was this kind of grand party. Here's some more photos of it. In addition to 900 or so lights, one of the ideas here was we replaced a lot of the performers' faces with the actual footage of their face from the film projected on a small projection screen attached to the whole thing. So in addition to about 900 lights, we had about 170 video sources. So it was a pretty large undertaking. This is a room that we talked about as the conversation room. So this was actually pretty fun. We lit real costume artifacts that you see here. This is a costume from the movie The Birds. But then we created these tables where we projection mapped down supporting material, and then the curator had interviews. So this is Martin Scorsese, he's a little out of, but where the director had an interview with Martin Scorsese that was edited together with another display over here that was made it appear as if he was having a conversation with the costume designer. So guests could come through and sit down and sit at a table where the director and costume designer were interacting with one another. This is the Indiana Jones costume. So this was a great project for me, and we'll talk a little bit more about control on it later. But it was from a purely design standpoint, from the sources, to be able to evolve out of using theatrical larger sources to going to small sources. Specifically, these were the source for LED and gallery fixtures, so we had really great, brilliant color, good color depth. I was going to say high CRI, but Jake's going to tell you after lunch why that doesn't matter. So that was my first example of going into a project that other people had already done, but bringing my creativity and my experiences to do it in a unique way that still was very successful. The next kind of example of something like that is the opportunities I've had to work in cinema. Film is a medium that is very, very established and has a lot of great tradition and lineage and intellectual capital at its back. I've been brought in a couple times to bring my take on the world to a film set. And again, I thought it was an interesting example of kind of bringing what I knew to the project and process, and kind of how it got us to a more kind of interesting outcome. So the first time I was asked to do a movie, it was this movie called The Incredible Burt Wonderstone with the actors Steve Carell and Steve Buscemi and Olivia Wilde, and there was a great cast. But effectively, the concept was these two guys were great friends and Vegas magicians. So I got called in, and Jim Carrey, he's coming up next. So I got called in to be the theatrical lighting designer that then the movie unit could shoot. So it was important for me to have a knowledge and an understanding of the way the camera and film processes light, but it was also really important for me to know theatrically how we could tell this story inside of the story in a way that made sense, where you would believe that they were on stage. So it was kind of, I almost imagined myself playing a theatrical role on it, where I was a different lighting designer for different scenes depending on what was needed by the script. The biggest things I learned here were just the intense and amazing collaboration the film world had, and how important and fast and furious it was compared to theatrical blood that I come from, where planning is at a premium, whereas on the film set, it's a lot more, we show up and figure out how to do it on the day. So I got a lot of experience of how to work and collaborate with them at their pace while also giving them results that they understood. The other thing that was really interesting and important and scary about this movie was it was my first time working exclusively in film. So we had to trust our training and trust the collaborators and specifically the director of photography that we could create pictures that would translate when the film was developed, because there wasn't an ability to really preview what we were seeing until the next day or the day after. The success ultimately came simply by understanding balance, understanding teamwork, and understanding what it wanted to be theatrically, to tell that really story and to have faith in it and to bring to the table what they asked me to be a team member, which was a theatrical lighting designer. I had the fortune about a year, just a little over a year and a half ago, that same director of photography called me again to do another movie. And it was interesting. He's progressed in his career. I've progressed in my career. And so this time he was calling me about a movie. It's the third installment of the Pitch Perfect franchise that just came out last December. It was called Pitch Perfect 3. And when he called me, he said, all right, this is different. This is going to be more music and more site-specific, and it's going to be more like a rock concert. And I said, that's perfect. That's exactly what I've been doing. I've been doing those things differently. So once again, I put on the hat of a band's creative director, and we started to create an experience based on those things. Technically, the thing that made this a much different experience was, as opposed to Burt Wonderstone, where we were shooting on film, now we're moving towards, this movie was captured exclusively digitally, so we had a lot more ability to push the boundaries technically and lighting-wise and not know exactly what it was going to look like. We could show up and just really, push it to where we wanted it to be finally. Our involvement in the movie was across 4 scenes. So these pictures that you're seeing here were from the very first scene, where it was supposed to be a small, kind of fun, intimate gathering at an aquarium as a charity benefit. So as such, it was really important that it was a small, very compact light plot, no more than, I think it was like less than 60 lights with overhead and side light. But it also needed to have a lot of energy and excitement and match the choreography that they had. This was the first kind of opportunity for this the only person that I knew at that point was the director of photography. So this was the first opportunity for me to collaborate with the director and new producers and a choreographer. So quickly it became apparent we had to figure out a way to communicate what I was thinking that they might not be seeing in their head yet. So I went back to pre-visualization, that thing that we used for Genie way back when, and we used quite a bit on rock and roll tours to previs. I thought this would be a great opportunity to use pre-visualization software to communicate with the director and the team and take choreography and lay them all together so everyone could kind of see where we were going to be and go and get on the same page, which was really great for them, because while I was preparing this and all of the subsequent scenes, they were off shooting all the other interior stuff that I didn't necessarily have any part to do with. So what you see here is a vision example of the rig where we mocked up the inside of the aquarium, and I took this and overlaid it with rehearsal footage of the ladies in the rehearsal hall so I could get the choreography and know that it was all going to work, and I could send it out to share and be commented on by the producers and by the director, and they could say, oh, I don't like it in that section to be blue, it should be turquoise, and it was a great communication tool. Progressing through the movie, so after our first scene, this is our first intimate scene, we had to shoot, we were tasked with shooting a rock and roll tour. So we wanted to make it feel like a single location could have been an entire 6-week tour. So the solution to that was we created this diamond-shaped stage in the middle of a Citadel field. And the diamond stage allowed us to design a single light plot that was symmetrical across both hemispheres. And then as the day progressed, we could shoot it 3 different directions. So we started shooting it this direction, so we had this large building as a backdrop. And then as the day went on, we moved next to this angle, so we had these trees as a backdrop. And then for the night scene, we shot this direction, and we had these trees as a backdrop. So it allowed me to have to think about how I was going to light it for the day and night simultaneously, because we had to do this whole thing in a single day. Here's kind of an image of the rig, so you can see overhead, it's all symmetrical. So we could just rethink of the way the console was patched, and everything, this, which is a backlight here, would then turn into this far backlight as we rotated around throughout the day. Again, the saving grace here was the ability to previs what it was going to look like, because we knew what the choreography was going to be, we knew what the rig was going to be, and we had this opportunity to really use this as a communication tool, because when it came time for the actual day, there wasn't even time to think about it. All the lighting had to just be done. It just had to be done, and my job on site was to make sure that it was exposed properly, and we rounded off the edges and fixed it, but there wasn't time to create once the main film unit was there. The next scene that we did was on a Air Force Reserve base in Georgia. It was meant to be a kind of charity tour where I designed this to be and feel a lot kind of like a vintage rock and roll rig was the thought. So we wanted a lot of tungsten. We wanted a lot of kind of rock and roll feeling. This was an example of, it was kind of interesting. We put 4 bands on stage for this that were intercut throughout the movie. And I really wanted all 4 bands to have a slightly different look. The director and producer both didn't understand why I wanted them to look different, but more than not understanding, they were really mostly concerned about the time, because they just wanted me to be done. They didn't want to ever have to take any time to worry about my changeover. So we created a couple plots where we could show how all of these towers were actually simple rolling towers that we could do full changeovers from the full stage to no stage in less than 3 minutes. And this sign was just on an automation hoist. So as a result, we could get 3 distinctly different looking rigs for 4 different bands. So as you see here, this is with all of the back removed and the sign up, so you could see that there was airplanes out there and lights way out far on the tarmac. Again, we were able to use pre-visualization to get everyone on the same page of how this was going to work and what each individual scene was going to look like and how we were going to cue each song. Because here it was really important that one band that was kind of the antagonist of the movie look really great and aggressive and sharp, and our heroes of the band, kind of this is their opportunity to like not actually look as great. So we had to create a lot of previs to show and explore what all that was going to look like. The last scene we shot in the movie was the big finale scene of the film. So this is again on a soundstage. This is a previs. This is a previs still shot of the actual scene, which you see here. This is 100% Hollywood scenery. Like none of this is real. This was all sculpted out of styrofoam and plaster, and we added lights on top of it to make it feel like an ancient ruins in France. So the takeaway from all of these were, again, to kind of leverage old experiences into new experiences, and be confident in your own experiences that can give you a unique output and a unique take on the solution. It's not necessarily, if I were to have come at either of these movies or these museums and only looked at it as the way that it had been done before, and which was quote unquote the right way, it might not have been as successful because it wouldn't have been my product. It wouldn't have been the way I think about it and playing to my strength. I can do my experiences better than anyone else, and I can't do other people's experiences very well because they're someone else's experiences. Experiences open up doors, and experiences compile on top of one another. And if you allow them to excite you, and if you allow them to drive you to the next level and the next opportunity, it can be really liberating. So what does this all mean? So there's a lot of, to me, the philosophy of creativity outweighs technical know-how. Whether you're a technical person or a creative person, you have to have a philosophy of creativity to be successful. If you only bind yourself to technical know-how, it tends to drag you down. It tends to keep you grounded in what is possible and what is not. And I have a big belief that anything is possible if you give yourself enough opportunity to figure it out. So that kind of gets me to this part, which is what is outside the box. Thinking outside the box is someone who brings solutions to complex problems by unconventional means. There are many times where you hear, or I've heard, someone faces a challenge and a producer or a director or the person in charge realizes there's not necessarily a solution immediately on the table, and they think the solution is an outside of the box thinker or an outside of the box idea. A lot of times outside of the box thinkers are considered to have kind of a mysterious ability to synthesize solutions, right? When people get labeled as an outside the box thinker, it can often come across that they have more ability at their access than the normal person does. People often think because they don't have the answers themselves or don't know anyone who has the answers, an outside the box thinker would help bring those solutions about. In truth, we're all only capable of thinking inside our own head. And the more comfortable we are with that, the more flexible our thinking can become. Thinking inside of our own head is our own box. Our box is only apparent to us and consists of your own personal experiences and solutions that you can keep in your head or in your box. When I talk throughout this whole presentation about amassing tools and amassing experiences at your creative disposal, another word for it is I'm really just desperately trying to build a bigger box at all times. And I think it's a real possibility that we all in this room can do this. If throughout our career we strive to expand our boundaries and expand our box, we can appear to our peers and others and our clients and our producers that we can then think outside the box, while in actuality, we're just creating a larger set of tools. One of my favorite examples of that I first was met with a producer asking for an outside the box solution was when I was at the opera, and we at the LA Opera were embarking on a long journey of producing the Ring Cycle, which is kind of the ultimate piece for an opera company to get through. It has broken lots of opera companies, and it just tends to have, it's an epic piece of music of four operas that a lot of times takes years to produce fully. And the company was having a really difficult time finding a lighting designer. I was the head of the lighting department and in charge of facilitating all of the design opportunities, working with the lighting designers. And the company was having a really hard time finding a lighting designer that could work with and understand the director. So to them, the solution was we need to find an outside-of-the-box thinker / lighting designer. Really what it actually was that they were looking for was they were looking for someone whose experiences poked in different areas and different degrees in a way that matched kind of the crazy ambition of this opera director. They just were failing only because they were looking inside of a smaller box. So they worked with a creative director and designer who you will hear a lot about in my career that I've worked a ton with, by a guy by the name of Brian Gale, who we brought him in because he had a lot of Disney experience, a lot of video experience, a lot of touring experience. So what did that mean? That just meant his box was different than the opera box. So he didn't do opera. So to them, he was an outside of a box thinker. Their idea of getting him could qualify as outside of the box thinking, but really all it was knowing that there was someone out there with a different set of experiences that could make something crazy enough happen, and that becomes outside of the box thinking. To me, thinking outside the box it's really just smoke and mirrors. It's a magic trick that allows you to see the world in a way that your colleagues can't, because we've pushed our horizons in directions that others haven't necessarily pushed in. Because every single one of us in this room is already an outside-the-box thinker. Whether you know it or not, you are. Because of what we do and what our job is, we're already leveraging technologies in ways that it's not intended to do, using data and using light in theatrical, in architectural, in installation ways. We're all already outside the box thinkers. It's already started. Because our industry changes so fast and our projects come and go so fast, we also have the ability to grow our box faster because we have such a high turnover. And it's really important to allow yourself to bask and understand that that is a huge asset to what we're doing. And that all of this pre-qualifies us to be outside the box thinkers. If you really concentrate on the opportunity to consume all of your different projects, jobs, producers, installations, shows, whatever it is you might be working on, and use them to amass more and more tools at your disposals, you become someone with an expanded box. You become an outside-of-the-box thinker. I think at this point it's probably okay we can dispel of the slogan of thinking outside the box, and we should maybe reframe what it actually is. I think we should hopefully believe by now that thinking outside the box isn't really a real thing. No one has an ability to be magic. As we said, it's just a collection of our experiences and tools at our disposal. So if that's the case, what really is outside of the box thinking? To me, outside of the box thinking is purely just a developed sense of creativity. When I speak with people about creativity, I think there's a misnomer and a pretty stark opinion of what it is and what it isn't. Realistically, I believe creativity, that it gets mixed up a lot with artistry. And I think realistically those are two different things. To me, artistry, it can be accounted for when you're considering how painting looks, or graphic design works, or music sounds like, or how a poem makes you feel. But to me, creativity is really just the ability to think on one's own and solve problems that may not have a prescribed answer. That's simply to say there's some degree of creativity in any success every one of us has by solving problems, wherever it may be in our industry. I'm going to use these two pictures just as an example of creativity, because I think a lot of people first see this and the gut reaction thinks that the creativity is the way it looks. And yes, I will acknowledge that I had a creative role artistically in where we were going to put lights and how they were going to look, and the production designer and how the scenery was going to look. But that's some artistry and creativity mixed. But creativity is not limited to just that. The process to get this on stage or on a sound stage, as the case may be, used a lot of people who used a lot of creativity in ways that aren't necessarily artistic. There's draftsmen and engineers and production electricians. There's an insanely large amount of programming. There's engineers who developed all of the lighting fixtures. There's sales representatives and distributors who got those fixtures available for us to use. All of those things had problems, and all of those people use creativity to solve those problems and to participate in that final outcome. So if we limit creativity to strictly what something artistically looks like, I think it is doing your own and the world's creativity a really grave disservice. So if we kind of concede to that as what creativity is, so how does it work, and how do people develop their own creativity? And I think there's two main things going for anyone who has creativity in the definition that we're talking about today. I think first, they know how to expand their box. They know how to make their box bigger by collecting concepts that they've experienced over their career to have at their creative disposal. New shows, new experiences, new installations, new products, people you meet, dealers you meet, all of these things add to how big your box is. The second thing in creating and cultivating your creativity, I think, takes a little bit more practice, but it's still extremely attainable. To me, the second most important part, or the second tenet of creativity, is the knowledge of how to connect concepts in a large world. It's seeing the world like a puzzle, but you have to remember what and where all those puzzle pieces are and who has them. I think of it kind of as this like node-based, three-dimensional world where as you go through your life, you're constantly remembering what a light can do and what you've seen and what console has what strengths and what weaknesses and what people are good at what things. And you squirrel all those memories away in the back of your mind, and you have them floating in space. So when you need them, when you come up against a problem, the more of those nodes of information you have at your disposal, the more quickly and accurately you can synthesize a response. I think the most important thing where people go wrong in these is they think to qualify as a node, to qualify as a thought that you're having in your arsenal, you have to fully know how to execute that thing. And to me, that is where I have a strong belief in the other direction. I think it's extremely important that you don't necessarily have to worry about what the answers to all of those things are. You don't need to know how to do advanced filtering in an EOS. You just need to know that it can do something. You don't necessarily need to know what the DMX order of a fixture is. You just need to know what that light maybe is good at. You have time to go solve other problems after you figure it out. You just need to know the capabilities of those nodes, not exactly how to execute them. We're going to talk about a couple examples, but I tend to use the examples of the way I think of lighting control, because I think I use lighting control a lot as an example for connecting nodes, because I think I have a kind of a long history of using lighting controllers in ways that they weren't necessarily developed to be used. So here's a couple examples. So back to this Oscars museum that we did. I had about 900 lights, all conventional, and not a lot of time to focus them. It was an architectural installation, so conventional wisdom would be that it should be controlled in an architectural controller. We had a tight timeline. There's a ton of oversight. We needed a control system that had the flexibility of a theatrical installation. But I also wanted to kind of have the ability to do all the architectural type things. So I created a hybrid control system for this project where the entire operations, DMX sourcing, the programming was all done on EOS, and it was all on a standalone EOS that lived in a control rack. The main reason that I wanted to use EOS was I could have, during installation and test and adjust across the 7 galleries, I could have 7 lighting directors and 7 programmers all simultaneously bringing up different channels, and we could focus all at one time. That's something that a theatrical desk is very good at, and is not functionality that's necessarily needed in an architectural controller. But I also really wanted to have architectural style controls, touch stations on a wall, time of day events, some logic that you could get. So to me, I wanted the things that Mosaic could bring to the table, but how do I rectify those two things? So the solution there was I turned Mosaic touchscreen into a show controller with no DMX control, and it was only connected via UDP to the console, and it was so the architectural controller as a show controller played back all the video systems, dealt with all the lamping on and off of all the projectors, and put us in the right light queue, but I had EOS on board to actually be the DMX source. So my next example is if the last one was I used a theatrical controller on an architectural project, this one is I use an architectural controller in a broadcast studio. Here's an example. This is the Universal Broadcast Studio in Los Angeles. It's 2 main news studios, a large newsroom, and 4 ancillary studios. When we came at the control and programming of this project, it was really important that it be a standalone, kind of invisible system. The entire studio runs with only 2 technical staff across 2 television stations and all the various studios. Like all the cameras are robotic, all the switching, all the automation, all the Chiron, everything is run off of a show control system. So there's no playback personnel on board. So in this case, it was really important to have something that was robust and fail-safe and could live in a rack and operate without being touched for years and years and years, which is exactly how it's been going for the last 5 years. So this entire studio is run off of Paradigm, architectural controller, because it gave us the ability to do room controls and do various logic. So depending on what the news show controller is asking for, it can change from the normal news state to the nighttime news to turning the green screen on and off, go into special news alert modes and change the colors, all without anyone operating it. It all is just programmed in via UDP serial strings that come from the main news show controller, which is a program called ROS Overdrive. So if we're gonna take kind of daring creative steps, if I'm gonna have this approach to technology, I'm often doing projects where I'm trying to achieve an end result that either no one's done before or I haven't done before, and I tend to use products that people in ways that people aren't intended. How do we keep ourselves from falling and failing? Because above all, that's the most important thing. There's never an option to fall short. I've never failed. I've had outcomes that I wasn't expecting, but it can't ever not work. It has to work. That's what we all commonly know in this business. my belief is there's no way to explore technology and creativity without ultimate trust in your team. We talked about this a little bit earlier today, but I think it's worth coming back to is equipment and support system. For me, that node-based, three-dimensional thinking of creativity includes a huge part in putting a team together. And that team consists of all the players to be at a certain level. And that team isn't only you and the programmer and the people who you see, but that team is your lighting vendor and the manufacturers and the reps. And if you come to a project with anything less than the best, there's an opportunity for failure that stifles creativity. So oftentimes, the biggest footprint on a project is the lights and lighting and the control system and the technology itself. So to me, if there's any chance of that wavering at all, it puts a really vulnerable position on the way you're going to try and creatively approach a process that makes it really difficult to take those daring steps. So, I'm here at the behest of C&C and ETC, but I'm really pleased to do it because it's a part of the team that I believe very strongly in and have had great success with, because I know when I care about something that I have a friend at the other end of the phone that cares just as much and is willing to take those steps and those daring places with me. So thank you for talking about that. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to do a couple case studies. And this one I think is an interesting one because it's actually a very concise technology and display of technology that does a very big thing. And then the next one will actually be a kind of an established result where we used a lot of technology to solve it. So they kind of will hopefully balance each other out. This first one we're talking about is Tillicum Crossing. It's a bridge in Portland, Oregon, that was opened about 2 years ago, I think. Tillicum Crossing is the first new bridge in Portland since the 1970s. It's no cars, public transit only, and pedestrians and bicycles. Early on, it was important that there was a public art component. And I came in later in the project to figure out how to achieve some of these ideas. But when it started, a husband and wife, artists Doug Hollis and Anna Murch, were brought on. And it was them who came up with kind of the creative vision of this bridge, which was that this bridge was meant to be a conversation between the river and the bridge itself. So what does that mean? The conversation with it was, the idea was the lighting programming for the bridge would be fully dynamic and updating based on environmental data. So the concept of this bridge was harvesting weather, water temperature, direction, turbidity, tidal flow. All of those factors would come in and we would crunch those numbers, and it would make it so the bridge was this evolving landscape that never looked the same from day to day. So how do we do it? So that's what we're going to talk about now. It's actually extremely simple once we got there. Here's the bridge during late construction. As you see, so this whole bridge here is this side of the bridge here. There was a control room here that housed this rack, and then there was all of the various fixtures. It was all lit by D40 exterior ETC Celador fixtures. So in the control room, we had a Mac where we had a custom front end. We worked with another visual artist by the name of Morgan Barnard, who brought me on and I worked alongside with. He wrote a custom coded front end which web scraped data off the internet. So most notably, the discharge rate, the height of the water, the temperature of the water, the tidal flow, and the velocity. So all of that data was pulled off of public information websites. So the National Oceanic Atmospheric Institute, the Fish and Game, various other government agencies that post this data that dynamically updates, weather stations and the like, and use a process called web scraping to go out, find that data, zero in on where that data was updated and how often it was updated. And so that came in off of the internet and went into Max, which is this program right here, where that data dynamically updated all of these cells that you see here, which showed us what our temperature range was, or how fast the water was running, or what direction things were going, because the river went in both directions depending on the tidal flow. And all of these were mapped to kind of a pre-visualization of, so if this was color or this was velocity, and then all of these nodes then mapped to down here. These are all output UDP nodes that would then connect over network to the ion that was connected, where it was driving how the submasters and how the looks went together. So here's an example of kind of a year's worth of data of one of these sets, and this is kind of how the thing works. So here's our plan view of the pixel map on the ion, where we laid the bridge flat. So these are all of the lights that lit the guide wires and cables. These are the lights that lit all of the main pillars of the bridge. And what you see here is the cue list and the media servers. We exclusively lit it using the pixel map engine on the EOS. So effectively what happened was, over a number of creative evenings, we sat, and I'll show you back here. We sat in this RV on the banks of the river looking at the bridge, and we started to create and find various lighting looks that we thought told the story of what the bridge wanted to be. So that was step one, is purely in EOS, I was using the pixel map engine to come up with concepts and the way the bridge could work. And after a couple nights of zeroing in on what was interesting and what looked good and what we wanted it to be, we then started to figure out what components of that we wanted to make interactive. So at first, it was really just about me trying colors, and then after we did that, we cut the thing apart into all of its individual components that then we could layer in and out, and then choose what atmospheric, what environmental data controlled what part of that pixel map engine. So we'll go back to this part. So what you see here is simply, it lives in a single open queue where various parameters of all of the pixel map engine are left open and controlled via submasters, and the submasters are dynamically changed via the Max computer coming in and giving UDP controls over network. So as an end result, kind of what we have was, this is a pixel map preview straight out of the console, and this is kind of a rehearsal. The bridge would never be this active. This was kind of effectively a year's worth of data that we were able to fake through using another input device, but you can kind of start to get an idea of what it would look like. So these are generative layers on the console running a Perlin noise, and these are various gradient bars. So this bar here would be the tidal flow. The color, there's a 2-color gradient, so the 2 colors would be affected by 2 different temperature locations in the bridge. The speed and direction of them would be affected by the height of the water, and the direction of this, and the velocity of this Perlin noise generator was affected by the gauge height. So it kind of gave an opportunity that it was this open and evolving system that could always kind of look different, and it never was intended for someone to be able to look at the bridge and say, oh, this is what's going on in the weather. It was more of an opportunity to take the environment and create something that was always open and evolving and interesting. If anyone has any interest, I have this show file on that console that I can switch over to if anyone wants to see and play with it. Because the idea was, it was rather complicated to wrap our head around it, but ultimately how it ended up is probably a very, very, very simple, one of the most simple show files I think I've ever participated in, because it's really just, we ended up with one main cue, one setup cue, and then in case of a loss of internet, I had a couple seasonal cues that it would just go to. So there was a cue built off of a couple years worth of environmental data. So there was a winter, spring, summer, fall cue if for some reason data was lost. Other than that, there was two light sensors that were placed on the top of the bridge, with the idea that it didn't actually affect any of the lighting programming, but because Portland is so rainy and so gray most of the year, we had the light sensors up there, so if it was dark during the day, so before sunset, it would activate the bridge. The light sensor would trigger a contact closure that would fire a macro that would turn the bridge on. Other than that, yeah, that is the long and short of Tillicum Crossing. So next up, the next and last case study that we're going to talk about is if Tillicum was a simple solution to kind of a grand thing that no one had done before, this next project was using technology to speed up the process of a normally longer technical incubation period. We did a parade, so leveraging our experiences with Tokyo Disneyland and Main Street Electrical Parade there. We were approached to do a parade for Chimelong Ocean Kingdom in Zhuhai, China. The parade is called Journey of Light, and we were approached about a year before the parade was desired to be open. By comparison, the Disney updates that we do, which we do 2 or 3 floats at a time, we take 2 to 3 years from design and concepting all the way through to the end of them. So the timeline on this was a year from concept sketches to completion, using all partners that had never done an electrical parade before. So it was kind of a huge creative feat and an ability to kind of get everyone on the same page and work forward. Here's 4 of the 8 total floats that we used. Here's all 8. The interesting thing about the parade was because of how fast it was going to be, one of the early thoughts that we had was we needed to put a lot of the weightlifting on creative programming and take it off creative installation, because we knew there was going to be so much installation that happened so fast that one of the biggest time takers in the process is in Japan, when we do the floats, there's about a year of applying lights and testing and making sure the right circuit is the right color and on the right control channel. And we knew we weren't going to have the time to do that on this parade. So the solution was to not worry about specifying how many circuits and what color and in what order like we do in Japan, but instead we did this entire parade with all RGB, individually controlled, single fixture per circuit. So you look at these floats and every single pixel is controllable on the desk individually. Across 8 floats, that was about 160,000 LEDs, so it was about 500,000 parameters of DMX, all run on multiple EOS family consoles, and then played back off of playback units. So it was quite a technological feat. It was about 800 universes across the floats, and then another probably 100 universes there was 110 costumes, so another 100 universes for costume playback. So the big thing that we had to do is we had to take our nodes, our knowledge, our experiences of the previous parades that we'd done and explore and share them with a really talented scenic vendor that we were working with and who had done parades, but they'd never done a night parade before. So we had to talk a lot about what's invisible and what's visible and how we're going to sculpt things and how we're going to apply light. So what we did was and you see here, there's a couple, like, this is all the sculptures, and this is how we went through, and really, we saw, like, the opening aspects of it, but we had to teach them how to apply each of those 170,000 lights in one of the 12 different application methods. So we effectively did mock-ups of each of the 12 methods. This is one of them that you see here. I'm going to speed through a little bit because I'm going a little bit long. But this is actually a really interesting project because this is a prime example. This is us programming, and we'll talk a little bit about how the functionality of EOS and the heavy lifting, the whole thing was programmed off of EOS because we had to approach it very theatrically in the way we're able to structure dimmer chases and twinkles. And because everything was dimmer per circuit and then channel per light, we had huge concepts of ideas that really, like, the channel level granularity really was kind of not as valuable. So really the programming technique we used was as each float was patched and wrung out, and that patching and wring out process, whereas as we're all used to, it usually takes a couple days or hours usually, a couple days at the most. Each of these floats was taking about 2 weeks to patch. So we'd have to take that patching data and embed it into groups, and those groups nested into larger groups that completed single lines and single concepts that then got compiled into artistic groups. So, you know, writing it forward, writing it backwards, having the ability to have a twinkle or a basket or all of those things. And then ultimately then to be able to write all of each float was about a 1:30 loop that then dumped back down to a playback device that all ran off of a Central Park server. So that's kind of speeding through a little bit, but that kind of is the idea, and we'd love to talk to anyone any more about those concepts or any of those parades or case studies or creativity later in the day or during the break. So thank you guys very much, and thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.